Hey everyone, it's Steph, and today I'm here to talk about the Zig Zag Stitch. Just like my other video on the straight stitch, this video is going to be divided into two parts. I'm going to first talk about exactly how to set up a zigzag stitch on your machine, and the second part is going to be me talking about the different uses of the zigzag stitch. So with that, let's get started. For zigzag stitches, depending on the type of fabric you are working with, your thread tension varies. If you're working with a woven fabric, I usually keep my thread tension around my default setting of 5, but if you are working with a stretch fabric, I usually fluctuate somewhere between 0 and 1. I would recommend testing your stretch fabric to see between those numbers which one works best. But for now, with our example fabric, I will be setting the tension to 5. Needle position on the style over here stays the same. For stitch width, there is a little graphic here that gives you an idea of how it will impact the zigzag stitch. The higher the number, the wider the width. So for now, I will set it at the highest number, which is 6. For stitch length, we'll do 4 so that you can see what the longest and widest stitch looks like. Last but not least, we will have to switch our stitch style over to the zigzag stitch setting. Now we bring in our fabric, set the sewing foot down, insert the needle into the fabric using the hand crank, and start sewing. When you're done, make sure the needle is raised, raise your sewing foot, and then we can take it off the machine. This fabric clearly is not the greatest choice for this, as you can see it puckering, but you get an idea of what the stitch looks like. The longest stitch and the widest length create a stitch that looks like this. So if we lower the length but keep the width the same, we will get a stitch that looks like this. The distance between the zigzags gets lower, as you can see. So now if we drop the width in half to a 3, you can see that comparatively it looks smaller. To better demonstrate the difference, let's put the width at a 1. You can see here that the stitches are very narrow. Depending on what stitch you are trying to achieve, by tweaking width and length options, you can create a variety of stitch variations within the zigzag stitch. And that is how you set up your machine to do a zigzag stitch. The zigzag stitch is something that is extremely useful for when you are working with knitted or stretch fabrics. The reason for this is because the way that the zigzag stitch is that it allows your fabric to stretch, whereas a straight stitch doesn't really allow that as much. The straight stitch, the thread will tend to pop if you have something that is a stretch fabric with a straight stitch on it, but with the zigzag, the fabric will be able to stretch and the threads should not pop. Like any stitch, zigzag stitches could also be used decoratively, but my number one favorite thing to do with the zigzag stitch is finish the raw edges of my garments. So when you cut fabric, specifically woven fabrics, there will tend to be some fraying along the edge of the fabric unless you use a special type of scissor, but that's a different topic. So this is where the zigzag stitch is a great alternative option to help you finish up those raw edges so that they don't fray as much. It's super great because pretty much every sewing machine has a zigzag stitch, and it's a great alternative to owning a serger, which a lot of the time people will finish the raw edges of their garment using something called a serger, but when you're just starting out with sewing and getting the hang of it, I think that the zigzag stitch is a better alternative because it's something that's already included in your machine and you don't need to invest in another one. That should be just about everything, so if you have any other additional questions, comments, concerns, you know the routine, let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, make sure to hit the thumbs up button, and if you're new, make sure to subscribe. Thanks so much for checking out my video, and I will catch you next time.